Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and we are going to dive into a beautiful habitat, our home for animals today, and we're going to do some exploring. So all of you explorers or scientists out there, I hope you are ready to explore a coral reef. Now, before we get to exploring, I want to share a way that you can communicate with us if you want to ask questions, if you want to share your observations, what you've explored, or just say hi. So my friend Lynette, who's controlling everything you see behind me, she put up this number. So this number is 562-286-1838, and that is our live text line. So you can take all those questions or observations and text us, and then Lynette will pass them on to me, and we can answer your questions live on the air. We can talk about animals that you want to talk about, so let us know what you're thinking today. Now, another way for you to reach out to us is we have an email address as well, and that email is live@lbaop.org. And you can use either of these methods to reach out to us today. We would love to hear from you as we are exploring. Now, we've got this coral reef habitat right here. So here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we break our exhibits down, or the way that we have structured our aquarium, to highlight different areas of the Pacific Ocean. So we've got our ocean backyard, which is our kelp forest, our local habitat. We have the northern Pacific, which gets a little bit even colder than our water here. And then we have the tropics, the warm water, and that's where we find coral reefs. So we won't find coral reefs in our local waters here in Southern California. The water's just too cold for the coral. But if we travel to areas like Palau, the South Pacific, Hawaii, anywhere the water is really warm, you're going to find these coral reef habitats. And so what we're going to do today is we are going to explore what a coral reef is, and then some of the animals who live there. Now, I always like to start with making some observations. And because we're learning about this habitat, it's a great time for us to practice that tool or that skill of sharing what we notice. So when you make observations, you might be an expert at that animal or that habitat. It might be brand new to you, but you can still share what you notice. So this is one of our exhibits here at the aquarium. We have a couple different coral reef habitats that we could look at, but we're starting with Shark Lagoon. So this coral reef is going to look a little bit different than maybe some coral reefs we'll explore in a little bit. But let's take a couple moments and make some observations. What do you notice about this coral reef habitat? Now, observations could be things that make up the habitat, and that's both living and non-living things. So maybe there's some things that aren't alive that make that habitat, along with the things that are alive. Observations can be the colors or shapes you see. It could be the animals and even what they're doing, the behaviors. Those are all observations. So go ahead, take a moment and make some observations. You can share them wherever you are. You can text us at 562-286-1838. Give you a moment, and I'll think about my observations as well, and then we can share what we're noticing. All right, so you might still be making some observations, but I'm going to share the things that I notice. So I mentioned that it's a coral reef, but I noticed there are different sections of coral, right? There's some coral right here, and then there's some back here, and all the way over here too. So maybe you notice the different areas of coral. I noticed that coral looks different. So even though there's a bunch of coral right here, a big chunk of it, they all are kind of different. There's this one that's kind of flat. There's this one that's kind of round. This one's got kind of a long piece. This one almost looks like a bowl right here. So the coral comes in different shapes and also even different colors, right? I see some yellows and green, kind of like a brownish. I see orange, kind of like a whitish pink. So that I notice the coral is different colors. I also noticed some rock structure, right? Right here is a hut. And it may be hard to see. I'm not sure if he's in there, but our turtles like to live in there. So maybe we'll see an appearance from one of our sea turtles today. I also noticed there's fish, right? There's all these little fish swimming up here, over here. And then I also noticed some sharks. I bet you noticed those too. And there's a couple different kinds of sharks swimming around, hence the name Shark Lagoon. And then maybe you noticed right here, it looks kind of like a stick. And that would be a good observation, but I'll tell you, it's actually the tail of a stingray. So maybe you saw there was a stingray swimming around before. Now I also noticed that the sharks seem to be swimming in a big circle, kind of around the whole exhibit, whereas the fish may be kind of circling just in a smaller area. I also noticed that it looks like it's sunnier over here than over here. So observations can really be anything that you notice. Any other observation? Oh, there's a fish right there. I noticed that fish had sort of a pointy nose. Maybe you noticed that too. So there's some more pointy noses. Those are unicorn fish. So if you thought, oh, that looks like a unicorn, you were correct. Those are unicorn fish. And then we've got some big nose unicorn fish that have sort of a rounded nose where that unicorn horn might be, but it's not as pointy as the other fish. Now I notice the fish and the sharks, their color is kind of gray. So not as colorful maybe as the coral reef itself. Excellent. So that was a great exercise in warming up our explorer brains. We made some observations of a coral reef. But now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of dive in really, really close on coral, figure out a little bit more about coral, and then we'll kind of zoom out and look at some different animals that make a coral reef their home. So coral, before we move on, this coral stuff here, I want you to think for a moment. Do you think coral is an animal, is a plant, or is a rock? Now, wherever you are, if you think it's an animal, you can make like an animal, like its claws. If you think it's a plant, you can kind of wave like you're a flower or a plant. And if you think it's a rock, you can make a rock. So go ahead on the count of 3. What do you think? Do you think it's an animal? Do you think it's a plant? Or do you think it's a rock? Ready? 1, 2, 3. What do you think? Those are some great guesses. Now, it's kind of confusing because coral kind of looks like it could be all 3, and it almost has all 3 parts to it. But coral is actually a living animal. So let's take a closer look at some coral. Excellent. So this is a kind of a smaller exhibit that we have here at the aquarium with live coral. And this is a good sort of first stop before we get even closer, because you can see that some of this coral is actually moving. So this is another exhibit. This isn't in Shark Lagoon, but look right here. This is a coral. This thing that kind of looks like these long kind of fingers that are waving. That's coral. This is coral here. This is coral. So some corals are harder than others, and some are a little bit more flexible and soft. And so that gives us a little better of an idea that coral, maybe it's alive, or maybe it's more plant-like than rock-like. So some corals, they are hard like a rock, but that coral is still alive. So let's zoom in even closer and break it down a little bit more. Excellent. So coral is actually what we call a colonial animal. And what that means, it's a group of animals all living together. Kind of like, we think about it like an apartment complex. If you live in an apartment, you live in your own apartment, that's your house, but you might have neighbors right next to you, and then they might have neighbors next to you, and then you might have neighbors above and even below, and it's all in one building. So it's not a standalone house, but you have all these different apartment rooms or houses all connected together. So that is kind of like what coral is. So each of these little wavy things, that's one polyp. So that's one inhabitant of this apartment complex. And all these polyps live together to create a piece of coral. Now I'm going to bring some coral up on my document camera. Let me grab a good piece for us to look at. And I'll show you. So this coral that I'm going to put on my document camera is not alive anymore. But let's change the lighting. There we go. So this is one piece of coral, just like we were looking at those big chunks. So this might be one color and there'd be another different kind of coral next to it. But if we look closely, you'll see all these different spaces. So we've got all of these different spaces here. And each of those little circles would have one polyp living in it. So there'd be one animal here, there'd be one animal here, there'd be one animal here, and here, and here, and here, here, and hundreds of the animals all living together in this one structure. So they create this hard structure, which is kind of like a rock, but living inside is an animal. So that we call it a colonial or colony, all these animals grouped together in this one space. And that is what makes coral alive, because it has those live polyps living in those structures. Now, those little polyps, if we go back and look at them, maybe they look similar to an animal that you recognize. A lot of times we hear that these look very similar to an anemone. I wonder if we have a picture of an anemone we can bring up. Now, anemones are much larger, and this is a cold water anemone, but it looks very similar to the polyp. and that's because they are related. Now, these anemones, if you're familiar with them, we have them here at the aquarium in our local waters, and these tentacles here have stinging cells in them. And that is how an anemone catches their food, is an animal swims through their tentacles and they use their stinging cells to catch their food. Now, coral polyps, go back to that polyp, they similarly have these tentacles, so you can see here. And so that is one way that they're going to catch their food, because they are a living animal, they need to eat, and so they are going to use those stinging tentacles to catch little tiny things that are floating in the water. And that's how they get some of their food, but they don't get all their food there, because in tropical waters like those coral reefs, the water is very clear. And what that means is there's not a lot of things floating in the water, and those things that we would hope would be floating are the food for these animals. In our local waters here in Southern California, our water tends to be kind of murky because it's got a lot of nutrients in it. So there's a lot more food particles for little animals like polyps. But in tropical water, there are less food for them floating around. So they will use those stinging tentacles to catch some food, but they need some help, because using those tentacles isn't going to give them enough food that they need to stay healthy. And so all these polyps also have an algae living inside them. Now, algae is kind of like a plant. It's a little bit different, but it's very similar to plants. And plants and algae use photosynthesis to help them get energy, which means they use the sun when it shines down on them, and they use the sun to get energy. So this coral polyp uses their stinging cells to catch food, but they also have that algae living inside them, and that algae is going to use the sun, which is really bright in tropical areas, to give them even more energy. So they're basically getting their food from two different sources. Now I wonder if we have an even closer zoom up of a polyp. Excellent. So this is just one singular coral polyp. What do you notice? You notice their tentacles, right? So these are their stinging tentacles. But then look at all this green stuff here. That is all that algae that lives inside them. So that's the algae that's going to use the sun, convert it to energy, and help give that coral polyp extra food. So by stinging their prey as it kind of comes through, and by using the sun for energy, this coral polyp is going to be able to continue to grow. Now, for many corals, when they grow, they're not only getting bigger, but they're also creating that hard structure around their body. So they secrete, or they release this hard structure that covers their body, and that's what helps build those structures of the coral reef. Just like the coral we looked at my document camera or in those exhibits. So inside those hard corals are these living animals, but they create this hard structure to protect their body and to create home for other animals. Let's go back to that one exhibit, coral reef. Excellent. So we can see all these different kinds of coral. Now that algae that lives inside them is what's going to give them the different color. So that's why we see different colors of coral and the different structures or the shapes of their body. So we can see there's tons of different types of corals. We've got one here is a different kind of coral. This one looks different. This one that we saw before. This one over here and over here. So they all have different sort of variations of that algae living in them that's going to give them that different color and structure. But then these coral reefs, they build on top of each other and they create homes for other animals. And coral reefs are very, very biodiverse. And what that means is they have a lot of different kinds of animals living in them. Some are small animals, some are larger animals. But coral reefs, they're only in a very small percentage of the habitats across the globe. Only 1 or 2% of our oceans are made up of coral reefs, but they have about a quarter of the world's species. So what that means is that if we think about all the globe and all the habitats, there's a very, very tiny amount that are made up of coral reefs. But if we think about all the different kinds of animals that we have on our planet, a quarter of them can be found in the coral reefs. So there's tons and tons and tons of different animals living in coral reefs. Things from little invertebrates like worms and snails, all the way up to big sharks, and even whales live close by to coral reefs. So they are very, very biodiverse habitats. Now that we've sort of set the foundation of what a coral reef is, right? The coral is the foundation for that habitat. Let's take a look at some of the animals who call a coral reef home. And I'm going to let Lynette pick which animals that we are going to talk about today. So what is going to be our first animal? Excellent. Wonderful. So this is a fish. We can tell that. but this is a very special kind of fish that we find in the coral reefs. It's one of my favorite coral reef fish. This one is called a parrotfish. Now, when you hear the word, or we call it a parrotfish, why do you think we might call an animal a parrotfish? Can you tell by looking at this fish right here? Maybe the colors, right? So parrotfish are very bright colors. So this one has sort of this bright blue and kind of corally pink color. There's even some yellow and purple. And parrotfish, we have some green parrotfish. They can be blue, all different kinds of colors. But they actually get their name for their mouth. So maybe we can look, excellent, this is the one I was thinking of. So this right here is another kind of parrotfish. And they get their name because their mouth is like a parrot's beak. So if you look over here, they have kind of like a parrot's beak. Now, these are actually their teeth. So whereas a parrot, their beak is what their mouth is, these are teeth, and they're fused together, which basically means they're like all squished together to make one tooth. But if we were to look really, 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 really closely, we would see a bunch of different little circles because they're all different teeth. But they're fused together to make basically a beak or a mouth for this fish. Now, having a beak-like mouth means that they have a really strong mouth. So likely they're going to eat something that's pretty crunchy. And that is important because the parrotfish likes to eat coral. So all those hard structures that we were looking at before, most animals can't eat them. They might pick at things that are growing on them, but most animals, if they try to bite into coral, what do you think might happen? Like if we tried to bite into coral or a rock, what would happen to our teeth? That's right, we would break them, and then we wouldn't be able to chew anymore. So that wouldn't be very smart for us. But parrotfish, with that parrot-like beak, can actually break or crunch into coral. Now, when parrotfish are looking for something to eat, they're not actually wanting to eat that hard structure. That's not the part they're going for. But do you remember those polyps that were on the inside? Those squishy animals? That is what they're looking for. So in order to get to those polyps, they can't just pick them out of that coral. They have to eat into the coral. So they use this strong beak to break in or to bite into the coral. They're going to process it in their body. They don't actually chew it. They swallow the chunks they bite. It gets processed in their body and kind of ground up. And then they absorb the nutrients, what they need. And then they poop out that hard structure. And when they poop it out, it's all digested and broken up. And it actually is pooped out as sand. Now, if you've been somewhere tropical, you've seen pictures of these white sandy beaches that in tropical habitats, so not here in Southern California, but somewhere much warmer, a lot of the sand on those beaches is made from parrotfish poop. Now, it gets cleaned once it goes through their body, and it actually helps build the beaches by processing that coral, breaking it down, and then pooping it out. So parrotfish actually help us build those really pretty beaches. Now, I'm going to have Lynette put us into our Coral Predators exhibit here at the aquarium. So we call it coral predators because those animals are predators of the coral. And we can take a look at some of our parrotfish and other fish who might be eating the coral here at the aquarium. Excellent. So we've got a couple different kinds of fish in here, but here is one of our, too far. Right here is one of our parrotfish. That's that first one we looked at, and we've got a couple other in here. So the animals in here, they are predators of coral. Pretty cool to see. So this is another one of our webcams. So we have cameras in this exhibit. But I'll let you in on a little secret. The coral in this exhibit is not real coral. If we put real coral in here, then those fish would eat their whole exhibit. Now, we want to make sure that our fish are eating the food that they need and they're staying healthy, but we also don't want to destroy too much coral. So the coral that you see here is designed to look exactly like coral we'd find in a coral reef, but it's not the same material. But what we do is we put these little blocks of what we call plaster of Paris. It kind of looks like a piece of concrete almost. I have one. Let me find it. We put them in their exhibit. It's the same material that real coral is made of, and we put their food mixed in it, and we put it in the exhibit so that they can eat it. I knew I had one here. Give me just a moment. I'm going to see if I can find our little block that we feed our parrotfish here. All right, well, maybe I'm not going to be able to find it, but that way we are able to feed our parrotfish the food that they need and give them the ability to bite and eat something crunchy like they would in their natural habitat, but we're not destroying the coral in their habitat. All right, so that is our parrotfish, but there's one more really interesting. Sleep each night in a sleeping bag. You heard that right. Do you sleep in a sleeping bag? Maybe you've had a sleepover at a friend's house, or you go camping, or you use a sleeping bag as your blanket, where you kind of snuggle up and zip yourself into that snuggly little case for yourself. Parrotfish, you heard that right. So parrotfish, every night, hello parrotfish, out in their natural habitat, they will secrete, they'll kind of have this slimy material come out of their mouth, and they'll cover themselves in a bubble of their own slime. Now that sounds kind of gross, but that actual body and covers their scent. And so another animal who is hunting at night looking for something to eat, and they're sniffing and trying to smell for their prey, they won't be able to smell the parrotfish because that mucus sleeping bag covers the smell and allows them to stay safe. And then every morning they kind of break free of that sleeping bag and go about their day, and then every night they make that sleeping bag again, which is really interesting. It's an interesting way for these animals to stay safe. Excellent. All right, let's check out another animal who lives in the coral reef. Excellent. We found another fish, but this one is really different than the parrotfish. So this one's called a copper-banded butterfly fish. So copper-banded, copper is like a yellowy color, and banded because we've got these kind of stripes on their body. But this is a type of butterfly fish. Now there's a couple things a couple characteristics of butterfly fish. So one of the ones we often see in butterfly fish is this mouth. So look at this mouth. Does this look the same as the parrotfish mouth? No, it looks really different, right? So do you think this mouth is going to be able to eat big chunks of coral? Probably not. We can learn a lot about an animal by looking at the shape and the size and the placement of their mouth. So looking at that parrotfish and that big beak, those strong teeth, we can tell they're likely eating something crunchy. But an animal who's got a really tiny mouth like this probably isn't going to be able to eat the same things as that parrotfish. So butterfly fish, they eat algae. So they eat really tiny little algae or little tiny invertebrates, and they're going to pick it off the coral. They're not going to eat the coral, but having this really long snout, it's almost like a straw, allows them to kind of get into all those cracks and crevices that we see in the coral. So all those structures have lots of things living on them and living, maybe hiding in them. And this butterfly fish having this long mouth can actually reach into those kind of hard to see and hard to reach spaces that maybe an animal with a larger mouth wouldn't be able to get to. And so that allows them to eat food that other animals can't reach. So that's one interesting thing about our butterfly fish. Now, another really interesting thing is maybe you've noticed more about the color. So I mentioned how they're copper banded. They've got these white stripes. What else do you notice? Did you find their eye? Did you think maybe this might be the eye first? Maybe you did, maybe not. Maybe you knew that wasn't the eye. But what's interesting to see their eye right here is the pattern or color on their body goes straight through their eye, right? So even around their eye, they've got some of that yellow and the white. So the color and the pattern goes straight through their eye. And then they've got this other spot right here. So this black spot right here is called a false eye spot. So an animal who's looking to eat a fish or looking for something to eat, they are trying to find the head of the animal. But a lot of animals will have a pretend eye somewhere else on their body, which makes it confusing. Because this eye blends in, so it's harder to find the head, and this one stands out, and so that makes it really confusing to find where the front of this fish is. Another thing is in nature, big eyes can be kind of scary or threatening. So having a larger eye spot can kind of throw off an animal because it makes them seem even scarier than they are when really their eyes are very small. So we see it a lot in nature. We see fish, we see sharks, butterflies. Lots of animals might have this false eye spot that helps protect them and confuse their predators. All right, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's take a look at another coral reef animal. Excellent. Wonderful. So we've moved on to a much larger fish still, but a different kind of fish. So before we looked at two what we call bony fish, because their skeletons are made of bone. But this right here is a type of shark, and sharks are actually fish, but they have a skeleton that's made of cartilage. Now, this particular shark here, this is a zebra shark. Now, they are one of my favorite sharks. They're very pretty and very fun to watch. We have a bunch of them here at the aquarium, or a few of them here at the aquarium. But starting with their name, zebra shark. Does that seem funny to anyone, to call this animal that looks like this a zebra shark? If you were to look at the pattern on this animal's body, do you think it matches what you would picture a zebra to look like? Not really. A lot of people see this and they want to call it a leopard shark. Now, I'll tell you that in Australia, where these sharks are native to, if you go out on a boat or you go to an aquarium and you see this shark, they will call it a leopard shark, which seems like an appropriate name. But here in Southern California, we have a shark that we already call a leopard shark. Do we have a picture really quick? So if you come to the aquarium or you snorkel in a kelp forest and you see this animal, we call this a leopard shark. So in California, this is our leopard shark. In Australia, this is their leopard shark, which is fine. But here at the aquarium, we have both of those sharks. So if I was going to feed them and you asked that I feed the leopard shark, I might give the wrong food to the wrong animal because these animals live in different habitats, they eat different things, and so we need to have different names so that we can keep track of them. So everywhere else outside of Australia, we call these zebra sharks. Now, we didn't just choose a random animal to name it after. We actually named them because of what these sharks look like as babies. Do we have a picture of a baby? Oh, so cute. Besides being very adorable, and they're pretty little when they're babies, they have zebra stripes. So take a look at the pattern on these babies' bodies. So they're black and white stripes, more closely resembling a zebra. And then as they grow older, you can even see on their fins, right here, there's some polka dots. So as they grow older, those stripes sort of break up and they turn into spots. I think we have some more pictures maybe of, or maybe we can check out. There we go. This is exactly what I was thinking of. So this one is a juvenile, so it's a kid. So it's kind of in between a baby and adult. And you can see that it still has those lines, the stripes, but they're not black and white anymore, and it's getting more spots. And then as they grow even bigger, when they're an adult, it looks pretty much like a leopard. And so that is why we call them zebra sharks instead of leopard sharks, because they're zebra stripes as a baby. Now, these are another tropical species, so we find these in coral reefs. Maybe we can go into Shark Lagoon and see if we can spot our zebra sharks. Now, these sharks, we can learn, like we talked about before, about based on where their mouth is, what they're going to be eating, or the kinds of food they're going to be eating. So these sharks, they don't have big mouths, and their mouth is on the bottom, right here, which tells us that they're going to be finding food that they find below them. If your mouth is in front, you're going to go for food in front of you. But if your mouth is below, you're going to eat food below you. And so zebra sharks, they forage for whatever they can find in the sand. So they live in shallows, and they feed on things like crabs, other crustaceans, anything they can find in the sand. All right, we'll pause for a moment. I like to say we break for turtles. This is Copper, our green sea turtle, exploring this coral reef habitat. Now let's see if we can spot one of our spotted zebra sharks. That's a funny sentence to say. So sometimes these zebra sharks will be just sitting in the exhibit. They don't swim all the time, and then sometimes they are swimming around their exhibit. I am not seeing them. They might be sort of in the back right now, but this is one of the habitats where you will find our zebra sharks. Now, if we go back to a picture, because we're not seeing our zebra sharks here, but if we go back to a picture of them, they have pretty long bodies. They don't have a super tall fin on their back, and then their tail fin is also pretty long. And that tells us that they're going to be more of a slower swimming animal because they don't have that really big tall fin. They don't have sort of that two-pointed tail. Their tail are just kind of almost like a hockey stick, kind of long and sloped. So these are not very fast swimming sharks, which is why the lagoons, so the shallows like we were just looking at, are good habitats for these animals. All right, everyone, we are about out of time. Sorry we didn't get to see those zebra sharks on our webcams, but you can always check out our webcams, both Shark Lagoon and our tropical exhibit on our website, and that's where you'll find zebra sharks in both of those habitats. So I hope you enjoyed learning about coral reef, all the amazing things that coral reefs hold. We've got lots of animals who live there. I hope you keep exploring and join us later in the week. We have more programming. We hope to see you then. Bye, everyone.